the PowerPoint. Feel free to just chime in whenever. I think you guys can probably speak your answers or questions as we go along. There's a couple places where I look for some active participation in this. And then you just take the sharing or take the host job back when we're done with it, eh? You already took off your host, or you already muted yourself.
I already muted myself. I'm still a co-host, but I just muted myself. I don't want to steal your thunder.
All right, here we go then. So some of you might know that some of the books I've written have been on games. I do love teaching through games, although there's certainly things that we can't teach through games. So I just, for the purposes of this PowerPoint, I'm talking about shaping, especially as it's related to the game Hot or Colder. But Hot or Colder is just one example of where shaping is something we're working on. So we'll get into a couple of other examples as well. There we go. So there's the obvious easy aspects that you guys have certainly memorized and probably understand also about the obvious aspects of shaping. We know the definition, right? Differential reinforcement of successive approximations towards the terminal objective. That's very good. And we know those examples from the earlier ABA workshops and lessons. First the kid just says bud, then it says ba, then he says ball. And that's good. If you're able to shape that up, that's really good. Someone has to come in, of course. I don't think. And we try to chain people to shape. Hold on just a second. Is somebody coming in? No, just an animal. All right. We try to train people to shape. We use modeling. We do the role plays. We have the in situ coaching. We show them videos. We do all of those things. You know what? Just a second. I'm going to let it's probably my cat insisting on coming in. So it's going to be less disruptive if he just comes in. I assume that's you, Ed. Yeah, come on in. There we are. I'm really not allowed privacy. I knew which one it was. Right. We try to train people to shape. We say shaping is important. We say you should shape effort. That is extremely true. Very, very true. I know that goes back at least to the Kegels as one of the names more associated with that recommendation. But after all of this, the happy, easy talk and the training to do it and all of that, most teachers still suck at it. And by teachers, in case you guys aren't familiar with my writings, I mean mom and dad, aunt and uncle, school teachers, yes, RBTs, BCBAs, across the board. People generally fall dramatically short in the area of shaping. I think there's a handful of reasons for that. Broad ones that are, some of them we don't really have easy, great answers for, such as exceedingly scripted protocols that draw teacher attention away from student behavior. I know that a number of online or electronic, tech things, like I said, I'm not tech savvy, but I know there's things out there that will script, where BCBAs would be able to script, here's how you do your SD, here's how you set it up, here's the size of the array, right? All of that ends up being scripted in there. I'm talking here mostly about teaching kids with special needs. That's most of my experience in the last decade or so. And the scripts have such control over their behavior, especially if they had a relatively brief course in how to become an RBT. Then they look at that and says, okay, put the array, have red in the middle, and say touch red, as just an example. And so the student is here kind of just waiting for them to be ready to present the SD, and then hopefully they give some feedback about whether the student was right or not. And then they go back onto their next, take their data point and go on to the next trial. That just takes too much attention away from, is the student, does he look interested in trying, right? So if let's take another kind of example. Let's take a motor imitation example. This is a little bit better for shaping. If we did we'll pull our ears out as a motor imitation. All right, if we're gonna do that and we were following a script to do it, and we didn't see that our kid was bored stimming out the window or something like that before we started it, versus our kid was there, eyes glued to us, just waiting for us to give the SD, the targeted SD. If we don't have that information available to us, we don't really know how helpful we should be, how generous we should be. Was it really a skill problem? If he did this and he was really looking like he was really trying, we should be a lot more generous about how we consequent that, right? versus if he was just out the window and he just did this, or he did this, but we could tell that he wasn't interested because we can gauge effort really well, then we should treat that differently. We could get into different examples of how to treat that differently, I suppose, too. So real shaping requires flexibility and really careful attention to the student effort, almost as much as it does to the accuracy of the student response. And the bigger the team is another, of course, bigger issue. The bigger the team is of people working with a student, and also the more natural the behaviors that are targeted, the more likely it is that people will forget, right? So if we said, take the example I just had of the motor imitation, that's relatively easy because it's a totally unnatural target, right? So you can have it scripted in your little tablet telling you, okay, now do the monkey ears thing. Do the monkey ears, at least when you're going to present that SD, that targeted SD, right? So you're ready to watch, right? But if we were talking about a kid initiating that he wanted to go in the backyard, or initiating that he wanted to roughhouse with somebody, and the kid is not very strong at initiating yet, and dad or aunt or whoever is busy with something else, they're on their phones, right? This is a more natural behavior that really would need to be shaped, taken from small approximations, very distal approximations, and shaped up, and they're not ready for it, and they're not noticing it a lot of the time. And that's just, one example, obviously. I think there is an overemphasis in general on errorless teaching, and also an overemphasis on just using correction procedures, right? And what those things do to us is either we're using errorless teaching a lot, so we don't get to see what a kid is capable of independently, and we're not necessarily, the more higher proportion of the time you're telling an RBT to do something errorlessly, the less attentive they are to whether the student is showing assent, right? Whether the student is interested in trying. Even if they're just interested in getting through it so they can get the iPad, are they at least being patient and attentive? We lose some of that if we're assuming that we're going to point at everything, or we're going to use a physical prompt immediately. A similar thing with corrections. And then some examples of shaping, some of the time this isn't very nice. Some of the examples I gave, shaping up a social initiation, sometimes it's more like, what was the effort if negative reinforcement was the real reinforcer, which frankly is sometimes the case. Some kids will do a chore really just because it's going to be over with when they're done, no matter how much, what else you try to give them after. They really just want to be done with it. And in that case, us allowing them to be done, or providing assistance after a relatively good amount of effort, is the operating contingency there. That's what we're trying to use to differentially reinforce, right? Okay, that's good enough to be done. Versus, frankly, the performance was inadequate and you weren't trying, right? And if you don't find a way to make that a little bit less efficient for a kid, this is an example of shaping. If you don't find a way to make that a little bit less efficient, you're not going to be teaching as effectively. Now, I'm pretty sure my cat needs to get out, but I think he can stay in. Okay, so knowing your students' goals. Some of you might also know that I've written a series of books on learner repertoires, which to me was under-recognized, and otherwise I wouldn't have written those. So there's some things that I look at apart from, does he know his colors, and can he read, and can he match in what size array? I'm interested in like what the capacity for scanning is, right? How well do they scan in general? What size array? On how many planes, low and high, right? I'm interested in all of that. The timeliness of responding, right? So difference between a half second versus 2 seconds. In some cases, if what we're really looking at is this student is emerging, he's growing as a learner somewhat, but a lot of his responses take 3 or 4 seconds. In that time in between, you're weakening the potential connection between the target SD and the response. The longer it takes, the more we weaken that. The longer it takes, the more the chance is that some teachers are going to prompt or redirect, remind, fight for the attention, bribe, coerce. There's a lot of other things that can happen in that time. And sometimes we really just want to get a student responding more quickly in general. And then we're doing a DRH a lot of the time, right? But it's not just, okay, if it's less than a second, reinforce. If it's more than a second, don't. It's sometimes 1.25 seconds is reinforceable and 0.8 seconds is not, depending upon what the array was and stuff. I won't take as long on every one of these notes, but improved thoughtfulness as opposed to being impulsive is more of a pivotal kind of a repertoire. Improving perseverance. If we're wanting to improve perseverance of something, I might be inclined to reinforce more generously if I saw that a student scanned for 2 or 3 seconds because it was a bigger array and a more complex SD that I gave. I'd want to reinforce that longer scanning better than I would have reinforced if it was right in front of me, found it right away, really quickly. Sometimes we're working on improved tolerance to various forms of support. Kids that are averse to physical prompts, insulted by gestural prompts or echoic prompts, that don't accept anything other than positive, feedback about their response. We get all of those are some of the issues that we might be needing to shape. For example, intolerance of, let's say, someone saying, "Oh, let's try that again." Let's say we weren't trying to say the word no, which is a word we should use sometimes. But we weren't trying to do that. We're just saying, "Oh, let's try it again." And some of our kids are rigid or controlling enough that they blow up pretty well over that one. Well, then did they go to 8? Well, we certainly can't help a whole lot with that. But if they went to 4, that's better than going to 8, right? If it's a 1 to 10 on as to how agitated they were, we might be able to be a little bit more generous in helping them through it if they only went to 4 instead of going to 8. It's another example of shaping. Okay, in the example of hot or colder, you guys are familiar with the game from childhood, I assume. You're getting hotter, you're getting colder. Boy, you're really hot. When I teach the game, especially for kids who aren't very fluent with language, I usually use the words yes and no instead of hotter and colder. I do that because I want the word yes to function as a reinforcer, as a conditioned reinforcer in a variety of contexts. And I want the word no not to be so aversive. It's just information. Like, well, no, it's not over there. It's over somewhere else. You should look somewhere else if I say no, instead of getting very upset because I said no. So I use it for all of those kind of things. Some people, and I wrote this to be sarcastic in the first place, but a lot of people really act as though the actual goal of hide the prize of hot or colder is to find the prize. And believe it or not, that is not correct. That's not the real goal. Yeah, we want them to find it most of the time. That is true, but it's not the actual goal. What happens, I wonder if you guys would give me a little bit of feedback here, give me a little participation on this one. What do you think happens when people assume that the real goal is finding the prize and they want to make sure the kid does? What kind of things do you think they do? I'm looking here at what the teacher might do if the teacher thinks the real goal, the ultimate goal of this is that the kid has to find the prize.
Okay.
A lot of prompts.
Yeah, a lot of prompts is what I was looking at. I see your point, Shruti, from the student's perspective.
Yeah.
But yeah, what happens with this is teachers will, almost all of them, until I really, really train it out of them, will prompt quite a bit. Well, one of the bigger goals, I think I probably have this on the next slide. One of the bigger goals of this game is perseverance, right? We're looking at, well, you don't know where something is. Maybe historically you're waiting for me to just tell you, right? Because a lot of our program might have been me just telling you things. And I don't want that to be, I can't teach you everything that way, right? I need you to become someone who recruits your own SDs more often, who looks around, who tries to problem solve somewhat. So that perseverance that I'm looking for, if we're prompting a lot, we're undermining some of that. We're looking at patience too. Some of our kids, like, you can't really start teaching hot or colder with a kid who won't tolerate a 3 or 5 second delay in getting a reinforcer, right? Because it takes longer than that to find it most of the time. So that's something that we're trying to work on expanding even further with the game. And looking at scanning, like I said, all the 3-dimensional plane. So let's treat this as a not rhetorical question as well, if you would. Most of you are already working with some clients. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I would think. So that's good. So what does your student do? Take it across any context, not just hot or colder, obviously, but in any context, when your student doesn't know what to do, what does he do?
He gets frustrated and tries to escape the task.
Yeah, that's the basic. Usually, there's some other things he might also do, but yeah, in general, it's like, let me out of this thing.
They guess.
Guessing? Yeah, absolutely. There's plenty of guessing.
Any
others?
behavior?
And
And someone says prompt, it become prompt dependent. They just wait for the prompt.
Yeah. Oh, plenty of them just wait for the prompt. Yeah. Okay. I'm shutting her down. I'm going to wait until someone prompts me. And this will happen if we don't actually directly address it. If we don't teach, like, what do you do when you don't know what to do? And we use a lot of errorless teaching, or maybe our corrections are, you know, a little on the harsh side if someone's making mistakes. If we have that kind of a package, we're almost encouraging our kids to just wait for the prompts, and which is the opposite of problem solving. So this is part of, like, the real goals of Hot or Colder. We're also working on the appreciation of yes. That's a really important word for kids to like. Was someone else adding some more? Or if it was just background noise, could you mute yourself again? Thanks. So we want them really appreciating yes. We want them to calmly tolerate no. With a lot of kids, I kind of fix their aversion to no almost just through teaching this game. And then we want them just to see that no is just corrective feedback. And almost all of our learners have some kind of room for growth on some of those things. Okay, prompting. Here's the question mark. Prompting in the purest version of Hot or Colder, if we're really doing it like an ideal purist, there's no prompting whatsoever. We just get started and say, okay, good luck. I'm going to tell you when you're closer and tell you when you're further. Prompted responding can impede the development of perseverance in scanning. On the other hand, this is where we have to be flexible as teachers. Really, really well-timed prompts can be appropriate based upon your experience. This student has looked now for 90 seconds. They've been looking, and their previous record is 60 seconds. And they don't look like they're agitated yet, but they're starting to scan maybe a little bit less often, right? They're not looking quite as well. They check the same place 6 times. I don't think they're going to keep on looking very much longer. In this case, they've already looked longer than usual. They've had good effort. They're being patient with it. At the time that they're still looking, if they turn, let's say the prize was this way. I think you guys can probably see my face. The prize was this way. They look that way. Then I might say, yeah, it's over there. And I add a big point really close to it. So now I'm saying yes again after the behavior. I'm still shaping the behavior of scanning.
Reinforce a correct response, but it's not coming. So somewhere there's got to be a balance between giving a prompt when a child is really, really novel and letting. So how would you place that? Would you say when you teach a task, prompt and then very quickly fade it and go to shaping, or what's the balance?
That's a great question. Yeah, there is a balance. We can't have, overall, we just can't have too much failure. And we also can't have prompt dependence or errorless teaching all the time. So it really depends on how much history my student has and how healthy that history is. If they are, let's say, somewhat averse to prompts and really haven't developed many skills at all yet, my first goals will probably be getting them used to tolerating prompts and teaching them that it really works out for them when they do. And I'd be prompting lots and lots of things. I mean, like 80% of their responses in a day might be prompted. And then I'm just capturing good behaviors that I like, you know, walking up with a smile or something like that, that just happens naturally. But there'd be lots and lots of prompting because I need to build some history of success that when I'm asking you to do something, I'm a source of assistance for you and we're going to work it out. When I get to something like more ambitious problem solving, and for a moment, let's take it out of the context of Hot or Colder. I did this with one of my guys. I realized it's probably about 8 or 9 years ago that I hadn't allowed enough problem solving. And he was stuck. He was wrote in some chains like dressing and things like that. So with him, I had to go a longer time getting him to just change his shirt, not change all of his clothes again. And he had every other example of fresh underwear over the top of pants that were already over underwear, instead of picking up the shirt that had sat on the bed for him to put on, right? So we went through all of those things. I think that loosely speaking, from his perspective, he was still convinced he was going to get rescued while he wasn't paying attention. And he had all the skills that he should have needed to be able to, like I was saying shirt, I was pointing at the shirt. I just said, let's change your shirt. He had every prerequisite for being able to do that, apart from he wasn't tuned in, and I think he thought he'd be rescued. So on that time, I let him fail 17 times in a row, where that was the exact number because I counted them, Every 2 to 4 failures, I would be just dial up my hint just a little bit more. I didn't want to give it away because I felt like I'd be reinforcing not attending. But I just dialed it up a little bit, and then he eventually got it on the 17th try. Most of the time since then, it would take him 1 to 3, maybe 4 or 5 tries if I set up a really ambitious problem-solving opportunity. What I told his team was, if we're setting up some challenges where it might take him 4 or 5 tries, let's only do that maybe once an hour. And we have to spend some part of the rest of the hour having him do things that he's confident with, because we do want him overall confident. We don't want him frozen. We don't want him paralyzed. So there's just some examples from either end of the continuum about when to be more generous prompting and when to be more ambitious on the shaping and the problem solving, but not letting a kid, you can watch their confidence wane if you had too much failure per hour or too much failure per day. If you're seeing, look for the signs of the ascent and withdrawal with the learner. And if you're seeing them slow to come to try to start things, and you see very little, very few activities that they will do independently, even easy ones. So if a kid might, let's say, struggle with, take something that works well for problem solving, struggle with loading a dishwasher, well, getting everything to fit in there, all that stuff, you might struggle with that. Okay, that might be, we might want to take that with problem solving. But if you just gave him even a relatively simple puzzle, something that he had all mastered, would he actually do it from beginning to end without reminders? Or has he mastered dressing without any reminders, without us handing him the shirt, any of those things? There needs to be a foundation of some level of independence in place with easy activities to build up the endurance. And then above the endurance comes the actual perseverance when things are actually confusing.
Yeah, so I'm just going to, sorry, Patrick, I think it was you. I was just going to read Divya's comment.
I was too. Go ahead. You got it.
Divya is asking, does shaping have to deal with only novel behaviors, I think, or do we have to make sure the client has this behavior in the repertoire before shaping?
No, it's not just with novel behaviors, and it doesn't have to be in the repertoire. That's a good question. We would be, let's take the example of, grabbing the ears again, go back to the imitate monkey ear. In that kind of case, it's not critical to me that he gets it perfectly the first time around. I would expect there to be some more gross motor imitation, because that's got some fine motor to it. There's a pincher grip there and pulling out, right? I would expect that he had good generalized gross motor imitation as a repertoire. So this isn't going to be a fine grade one to get it. It's not an important skill to get exactly right? So I can be shaping. I would end up having, maybe this kind of gets to your previous question too, I would end up having some balance between prompting and shaping. So let's say I saw a pretty good effort and they did this, or they were here, but there was pretty good effort. Then I might just tuck my fingers behind theirs and go, oh yeah, you got it. You're practically there. There it is. Yeah, you got it. And then I might reinforce the prompted response. But let's say that we've done this a couple of times over a couple of days, and I would only do something like imitate the monkey ears if that was mixed into a pool of at least 3 to 5 other responses that I'm looking for, right? So otherwise there'd be nothing important about that particular response unless it was paying attention to what the targeted SD was supposed to be. So, but if I saw that the kid then was, again, the effort was not great and they did this, then if I used the correction, it would be more like, well, actually, let's try that again. Let's get ready. Let's do this like this. Here's like this. Okay, now let's see if you can try it yourself. Do this one, right? I make the correction might be a little bit less efficient because I know the effort wasn't quite as good. I'm hoping that got to your question pretty well.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. Actually, on all of your guys' questions, it is a question of flexibility and balance and knowing what you're looking for in the trends of your learners if you've gotten your balance wrong, because you're going to get it wrong. We all get it wrong on a fairly regular basis. We just have to know what would it look like. What would it look like if it was wrong? If it was either like too easy, too much corrections, too many prompted responses, too much shaping or problem solving involved. Prompting a student who stopped looking. And now this is back to the hotter, colder example. And I will make this a rhetorical question because this is not part of a bigger talk on independence. But if we prompt a student who stopped looking, I would call that a redirection, not a prompt. And that is an important distinction in all building of all independence. You guys are probably familiar with redirection, maybe from Glenn Latham, you know, stop, redirect, reinforce. There's a problematic behavior. Hey kid, why don't you try this other game instead? And certainly it's an appropriate thing to do a lot of the time. But in the example of Tommy was supposed to finish a 5-piece puzzle, and he finished one piece, and then he shook another piece, and then he forgot what he was doing. Now, if he's, loosely speaking, forgotten what he was doing, and we're trying to remind him what he was supposed to be doing, we're not actually prompting because he's not actually trying right now. We're redirecting him from being off task to being on task. And that doesn't build connections between the links in the chain, right? If it was, let's stay with the 5-piece puzzle as an example, if they were to link it all together, then after the first piece gets in, that should be as SD to look for the second piece, right? And then so on and so forth. In the example of hot or colder, somebody stops looking. I'm wondering why they stopped looking. Have I not built the perseverance enough? Did I hide it too hard? Did they look better than usual or not as well as usual, right? So I don't want people using a redirection there. What would someone chimed in?
I was just thinking about the redirection part. It just drives me crazy because I'm in early childhood and everyone always says I use it as an intervention or I use that, and I'm like, and most time it's stop doing that, get down. And I'm always like, that's not redirection. It's
No.
It's like anticipation. You're seeing it before and you're kind of getting them and you're being one step ahead of the game. And you said that and I was like, man, I've always been preaching to the choir for the last several trainings to my staff.
Yeah. The first things they were talking about was corrective feedback, right? Like you've already messed it up and now you're trying to correct it. So yeah, I wouldn't call that those examples redirection. Good. I'm glad we're on. Okay. Yeah. Call it a redirection. I simply do not use redirections in hot or colder. I can't think of any exceptions to that. That's just a rule of mine. If a student has, so what do I do instead of a redirection? If a student has at least temporarily stopped searching, that tells us right now the effort isn't worth the prize. Whether he looked for way longer than usual before stopping, or whether he, gave up immediately, whatever, he is quitting right now. He has quit this one. So the question then would be, why would we want to reinforce quitting? We don't want to reinforce quitting. So we don't want to make it easier for him after he stops looking, right? For some learners, this actual, what we're calling a redirection here, isn't even functioning as a reinforcer. They might have sort of developed a new agenda, right? A new MO might have taken effect relative to how hard it was to find the iPad. They could have decided, I'm just going to play in this ball pit instead. In that case, if they just want to play in the ball pit instead, and we're like, come find the iPad some more here, let's go find it, we might inadvertently be using escape extinction. And we do not use escape extinction to teach hot or colder either. What do we do? Nothing, basically.
Question.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Back to slide number 11.
Okay.
And you were just stating, you were saying if you can go back there, we don't, reinforce quitting. But you made a good point. I mean, we wouldn't necessarily look at it as quitting, but wouldn't we look at it as, they're just lacking, the motivation's not there for them to continue to engage in what it is you want them to engage in. I mean, wouldn't we look at it that way as opposed to, oh, they're just quitting?
Okay, yeah, I don't disagree. Yeah, no, let me just reframe it for you. Putting it as quitting is a good way of taking a jab at people that that go back to whatever slide 4 or 5, thinking that the real goal is the kid has to find the prize, I have to score a plus with this. So I want to make sure that I want to make it clear to them that we don't want to reinforce this kind of behavior. No, if we were putting that in behavioral jargon, I would not use the word quitting. I would say, based upon the matching law, the relative effort required to find the prize is too great compared to the relative effort required to do something different than finding the prize. Yeah, this is just basic English here instead of behaviorese. And one other point, I think maybe also where you're going, we wouldn't use this, I wouldn't use the word to get everyone else to say, yeah, boy, this kid is a quitter. That's not what we're going for. I'm just saying, don't reinforce quitting, right? So trying to almost, it's more mocking the teacher to get them to understand than it is, let's join in mocking the kid. Okay, so what do we do when a student stops searching? Nothing. That's the basic, the challenging part about some of our play and some of our problem-solving instruction is we have to be more patient about waiting and giving a window of time for a kid to figure something out. Maybe he'll start looking on his own. Sometimes they do. Sometimes a kid will stop. It looks like they're not looking for 5 or 10 seconds straight, and then they end up starting to look again. That's great. Maybe one of his next movements is just accidentally, just by coincidence, they're turning the right way. And if it hasn't been a really long time, then I will say yes after they've turned the right way. Loosely speaking, this reminds the student he was searching for a prize. They may be back in the game. Oh, I got a yes again. That's a condition reinforcer for turning somewhere. That's right, I was looking for that iPad. If he does quit looking for a long enough time that you can predict from your experience with him that he's not going to start looking again, then I draw the game to a conclusion. So what I don't want is they just, the attention span is short enough that they just got off on the ball pit and now they're just playing in the ball pit. I want to be like, oh man, we missed, the iPad was right here. And I'd like them to notice that I said that. And then I don't, hand it to them like, here, I'll give it to you now, because they didn't find it, right? I'll put it, I'll take it back. And if they demonstrate that they're still interested in the iPad, they're like, hold on, yeah, I totally want that iPad. Then I'll probably ask, oh, do you want to try to find it again? Right? So I'm not changing my expectation in this case that you didn't look for very long to find it, and now you want to get it for walking to me when you saw it in my hand. I'm not going to renegotiate down to that level of exchanging with you, but I will hide it again if you want to try the game again. If you're patient enough to try it again, to persevere, I'll hide it. And if I thought your effort was pretty good before, I'll hide it somewhere easier than I hid it before. So I want to make sure you find it this time, as long as your effort holds up. Is anyone here familiar yet with dimensions grids?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I'm not.
Okay. I would have guessed you guys might not be. This is, I'll orient you to them now. I have a good several dozen, at least, dimensions grids in a couple of the books that I've published. And what these are broadly is a number of ways that usually hold up that makes any kind of challenge relatively easy versus relatively hard. So it's something that as behavior analysts, we can use to help us be more flexible. How could I get, right? We could, if we talked it through for a minute and I didn't already have this filled in, we could probably fill this in together. We want Tommy to find the iPad. It's easier if it's not as far away, if he really cares about the iPad compared to something else. If it's not hidden all that well, right? It's almost on eye level, just kind of sitting on the edge of a desk somewhere, right? If it's one of his first times doing this, that might be about how easy it is. 8 feet away, 30 degrees off to your right. So if you get up and take like 3 or 4 steps forward, I'm going to be able to say yes, and we're probably going to get to this thing. Versus you could be really, really challenging with how you hide things. For more advanced learners, they would appreciate it being more challenging. Not having the support in place, having a less valuable prize that's further away, not being very good at knowing when to say yes and no, right? Having poorly timed feedback. All of those things make it harder to teach a kid, to have him succeed in any given round of hot or colder. I use dimensions grids across, doing laundry, answering questions, reading comprehension, just about anything. Tolerating delays, all of those things. You can, tolerating losing in a game. You can make dimensions grids for all of those. and you can find ways to help your kids start demonstrating a repertoire that's really hard for them, right? They have very little history succeeding with, let's take the example of tolerating no. All right, very little history tolerating that, lots of problem behaviors, that's why you've been called to the case. How could we maybe set them up for some success with hearing the word no? And some of those things would be, we tell them they can't have something they don't want in the first place, right? You can't have the glasses case. All right, great. And we tell them that when we have their iPad. Now my iPod would be their iPad. We have the iPad here, and we're going to give it to them if they tolerate not getting the glasses case. You could see where that would fit into a dimensions grids. Neutral objects are easier than valuable ones. Powerful reinforcement makes it easier. It being our idea in the first place makes it easier than it being their idea in the first place, right? Following a spontaneous man with a no is always harder, because that means the MO is in place. The MO is in effect right now. Versus if I'm just walking you around the house, then you can't have this or that. The MO is probably not in effect, especially if I'm choosing neutral things. And I'll show you, I have one video that I'm trusting will make it across through our arrangement here. This is of a kid. He's been playing hot or colder for probably a couple of weeks. I would say a couple of weeks here. And he has to look pretty hard for this one. But his mom gets it and he perseveres quite well.
Steve, you have to take your headphones out of your ears for us to hear.
Really? Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I'm ready for yes, no game. Yes. 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 No. Yes. No. No. Yes. Yes. No. Yes. 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 No. No. Yes. 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 No. Yes. No. Yes. No. Yes. 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 No. Yes. Yes. Not up there. Yes. Yes. No. 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 Yes. No. Yes. No. No. Not up there. No. Yes. Yes. No. Yes. No. Yes. 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 Yes.
Ta-da! Yay!
I think it's going to Target.
Awesome. Nice job.
Target, then we come back home. Okay? Later you're gonna go to lunch with Grammy. Okay.
Perfect. All right, and that is the end of what I had for the presentation. I just want to make a couple of points about it and maybe ask you guys about questions with it. Why I like showing this video is it tugs at you, doesn't it? Don't you, like, man, he's going a long time. Well, yeah, you're almost ready to give up and prompt him. And it wouldn't have been wrong if Heidi 20 seconds earlier, 30 seconds earlier said, yes, right there, because he was looking really well. At no point did he stop looking. That shows some pretty impressive perseverance. 2 minutes and 37 seconds or so of looking, where the last pretty much minute of it was really rough, really challenging for him. And one of the other points I want to make with it, when it was more of a the comparison between gross motor and fine motor imitation as an example. When he was going from room to room, he was getting as many yeses as nos, probably. And he was immediately responsive to all of those. He didn't try the same behavior after a no. Then when it got more confusing, for a while there was probably about 10 yeses that were followed immediately with nos, right? It's like, well, geez, I thought you said it was yes this way. He holds up, right? He's patient through all of it, but he starts, the effect of no begins to lose its efficacy just a little bit there. He looked in the popcorn maker at least twice, after he was told no. He wasn't being naughty. He's just like, I'm starting to question whether there is a yes here at some level, speaking loosely. Starting to question whether there's a yes, so I'll just try here again because it seems logical to me. And I guess we could probably read into that a little bit more if we looked at the overall percentage of communication from any teacher about anything. If the overall proportion gets to be too much no, that was wrong, and not enough yes, that was right, then neither one of those messages really holds its value. All right, I'm open.
Actually, I had a quick question on this video. Isn't she supposed to put the previous behavior on extinction? So if he goes back to an area she already said no?
Okay. Not in this game, she's not. No,
Okay.
not in this game, she's not. If you take shaping from the textbook version of it, it says previous behavior on extinction, right? And newer behaviors reinforced.
Yeah.
Even the textbook version, when you get into application, the textbook version needs to be flexed a little bit. There's some behaviors that fall a little bit short that need to be reinforced because of effort. But there's gradients of reinforcement with it, and there's behaviors that get forgotten over time. Kids that are learning to articulate that come in on a Monday and they just don't have it on something. So you would need to be more flexible even in other examples of shaping.
I noticed that she was following him behind. Would that count as a physical prompt, closing the gap a little bit? Because if he kept going and she's right behind him.
Yeah, good question. I wouldn't call it a physical prompt. I would definitely call it a physical prompt, or a model is what I'd probably call it if she was leading him, if she was walking in front of him. But she wouldn't be able to know, whether he was closer or not if she wasn't close enough to see.
I just thought it was kind of interesting how she was right behind him wherever he would go, and when she would say yes, 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 no, 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 it's like from behind. Now he's in the kitchen and there's nowhere else to go, and of course he's getting more yeses, but she's also there right there.
Yeah, she didn't follow him into the kitchen. That's a good point. If she'd followed him into the kitchen, he might have responded differently. That's a good point. Any other questions? Can be about anything from this presentation or anything else related to shaping.
Someone is making a comment saying, is yes, no now functioning as a prompt?
They're functioning as reinforcer and corrective feedback. So it's not quite the shaping game that you play at behavioral workshops, where if you were just doing really pure shaping, there wouldn't be any no. There would only be yes.
Right.
Right. So this is not that. This is some bits of shaping, but what there's not is prompting. Although I think Patrick's point about Heidi not following him in the kitchen is a good one.
Mm-hmm.
The prompting, if we were prompting, prompts would come before the behavior, not after it. And they wouldn't teach the initiative that we need for the game.
Thanks.
Sure.
It sure does teach to discriminate between yes and no, which is really cool.
It does. Yep.
So Steve, did you notice that, does it get better as this kid played the game? I'm just curious.
Dramatically better. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, this one, it was hidden in a harder place. This one was on the floor, and he was used to looking eye level and up. And then at first it was basically just eye level, and then some eye level and up. And then, we realized that he wasn't ever really looking down. So this was the first time that we put it low. But where Hotter Colder started was it was in the same room. So the challenge was much, much less, right? Once he figures out and actually this is a good example too. I take that video as a massive success story. I don't take it as, oh man, that's a hard game. What a failure. I hope it gets better. I take it as a humongous success for all the perseverance he had there. If a behavior is learned the right way, right? Meaning effort was shaped up during it, right? He had to keep on trying after some failure. The perseverance was there. If it was learned without kind of the rescue, the prompt, the redirection, coming in at the wrong time, it gets learned more quickly. It sticks much more quickly. The kid that I gave you guys the example with the problem solving with the dressing, where I realized after a while that he only ever fully dressed. He never just changed a shirt. And it was a big wake up call for me. Oh, how do we get him to change a shirt? We're stuck on prompts for like 9 months. And this is an experienced behavior analyst. I tried, I don't know how many different ways of prompting, position, modeling, all this stuff. We had so many different prompts. We never got it until I finally just did the productive floundering version of it. Just did well, that wasn't it. Let's try it again. Once he realized the answer wasn't coming from me, he learned it and never forgot it.
Yeah. I also saw it as like a really good exercise for frustration tolerance too.
Oh yeah, yeah. And this is, you can't tell in this video very well, but that was a kid with a really big history of frustration over little things, over little rigid things. And he was very good at being aggressive when he wanted to be.
Thank you for sharing.
Sure. Thank you.
I have a quick question.
Okay.
My name is Melissa Martin. I wonder if you have any advice for helping caregivers or teachers or paraprofessionals, direct support professionals to learn to be a little more comfortable with the uncomfortable kind of weeded out time. I find that is a piece that can be really hard to get other folks comfortable with. So what would you suggest?
Yes, it can be. I have some of my talking points, although I think it's more about demonstration than it is about explanation. Some of the talking points, frankly, that one slide where I said, you know, why would you want to reinforce quitting?
Right.
That becomes part of my talk. So I've realized that the more confidence I have, and I don't mean like I'm thoughtlessly coming in and barking commands by any stretch, but the more I'm like, I'll start from the other side of it. When I was starting, when I was where you guys are, I went into classrooms with teachers who were basically inappropriate with their kids. They were inappropriately harsh on their kids. And I was brand new BCA, BA, and I was like hat in hand. I was, oh, I hope I can encourage you to, you know, I hope you could find it in your heart to see this as another option. And it was not what the teachers wanted at all. I was obviously talking positive reinforcement and things like that. And they would just beat the crap out of me for a couple of those teachers did for most of the year. One of the things that I learned over the next several years was that if I feel pretty strongly about something, based on my experience, if I come with more confidence, they will respect my message more than if I try to talk them into it. So that the example of the quitting, I will use that with teams sometimes, like, why would you want to reinforce quitting? Or they'll say, yeah, but doesn't he need to, isn't he going to be frustrated? And I will say, like, yeah, he'll probably be frustrated this time a little bit. Hopefully not too much. You know, we'll be here to help to shape the effort if we can, you know, we've set it up pretty wisely and we're going to try to shape up the effort. But if we don't do this, what does the future look like, right? If we don't build some tolerance of frustration and delays and that stuff at some point, then it puts a really big limit on what their functional living opportunities are going to be. And then from there, the opportunities that I arrange when I want the caretaker who is, you know, softer, more concerned about their kid potentially being upset. When I want to get them in, I try to give them a softball pitch, which is a little bit, you really need your dimensions grids at that time. Because the super softball pitch would be errorless learning, but that's not what we're talking about here. So I might take something like, if they were scanning matching identical pictures, let's say in an array of 6, I might just put it to an array of 8, right? And then I'll be sitting there and coaching, and I'll say, this time let's not have a really easy, point prompt. Let's just, if they get it wrong, let's say, we'll try that one again. And that's one example of that response was on extinction, right? I kind of tiptoe into extinction with them if I can, when it's time.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I do agree with the confidence part. Coming in classroom, if you not so much sound like you have you know what you're talking about, but just you're confident in your strategies, your interventions, there is a little bit better. I'm in schools too, and my first year to now, I see a big difference in a lot of this confidence. They're more willing to try new things and different things with me for how I approach it versus, well, I mean, I think this. I know. I mean,
yeah. Can we try it? Can we take some data on it?
Right.
Yeah. I'll go one step a little bit further. Over the last decade or so, I've semi-adopted a policy where whatever new person I'm working with, whether it be a parent, an RBT, whoever, whatever new person I'm working with, unless I just think they're batting 1,000 on stuff, and it's like, well, let's just rock it out then. I will find something to disagree lightly with within our first couple days together. The first couple times that we see each other, there will be something, because I feel like we need to establish what that relationship is going to look like. Because I do have there's because you're not batting 1,000, all right. So there's going to be something that I'm going to want to shape up. I don't want to wait until our 10th time together before I try to give any kind of, maybe you could think about doing it this way. Now you've kind of gotten accustomed to, Steve just agrees with everything I'm saying. And what I find is that, once in a while with a little bit more pain for me than I would prefer, but generally not. Our relationship is a lot stronger if we establish that relatively early. Okay, I see people are starting to head out, and we got a little leg in the IRT on the questions here. Shall we wrap it up?
I think we would.